Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about weapon modding for damage. So if we go inside of our tamer, right, which we use for all of our tests here on the channel, we are going to see that if you want to invest in weapon modding, you are going to need to level up your weapon quite a bit. Now, your external components and mainly your external components are going to be able to help out with some level proficiency gains on the minor sense if you get them, but re-leveling your weapon up to proficiency level 40 is going to be a must. Increasing the capacity using the energy activator is probably going to be one of the easiest ways to level up your gun. Besides getting these crystallization catalysts can be a pain. You can't use a crystallization catalyst on a weapon that isn't maxed out in proficiency level. Now, when you look at your settings 1, 2, and 3, and you assign a crystallization catalyst, most people don't know this, but if you assign a socket to that module socket set, then it is going to be locked in on settings 1, 2, and 3. You can't mod setting 1 and mod setting 2, mod setting 3. You're not going to mod the weapon 3 different times for 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 for 10 different slots. That's not how that's going to work. So when it comes to getting the max DPS out of your weapon, most of the things that you're going to be looking for are some of the foundational mods. You're going to be looking at these blue mods. You're going to be looking at the increase the firearm attack rate. You're going to be looking at double stacking that. The action and reaction does come with a negative modifier for a plus 20% recoil, so you're going to want to counteract that possibly with a vibration absorption, unless you really don't mind that type of extra 20% recoil. That may be minimal to some people. Now, when you end up socketing that socket on there, if you don't have the available mod capacity, even though it halves that mod capacity down, then it's going to take in the totality of what that mod is before it adds the reduction to it. So you can't like swap out a mod in there with a mod that is going to fit in there, even if it's going to be halved, right? As you can see there, right? You can't put the 4 over the 7 and just swap them out that way. You have to completely unequip it and put it back. But just want you guys to know that, just in case you're trying to build something, swap some things out, and it's telling you don't have the type of mod like capacity for that weapon. So let's talk about the damage types that go with increasing your damage. You have the firearm critical hit rate, you have firearm critical attack, you have firearm attack, and you have fire rate up. In essence, if you can shoot more bullets, you're going to do more DPS, but if you can't control those bullets, then what's the point of that? Does your weapon have the adequate amount of critical hit chance in order to spec into critical hit damage? It doesn't really give you too much of a boost, because like, I mean, if you're doing fire crit rate, right, and you put on that extra 10%, it's going to give you 1% of 10%, right? So 10% of 10% is 1%. Now, when I put on extra modules in order to control that recoil, that's going to give me more bang for my buck, in my opinion, as I can control the weapon better. The fire critical hit rate for the tamer itself is not that great. The attribute status effect trigger rate is fairly on the high side for weapons. Not the highest, but it's on the fairly high side. So when the game calculates damage onto a weapon, it's going to take into consideration as though that weapon is doing that damage when it comes to the critical hit rate and the critical hit damage of the weapon. Specifically the critical hit damage. Critical hit rate is going to be applied, but it's not going to be as increased, or you're not going to see those big numbers on critical hit rate. But critical hit damage is going to add an arbitrarily high number to your weapon's DPS value, as the game is going to calculate it as this weapon can do that damage, not that that weapon is doing that type of damage. So if you wanted to spec into firearm critical hit damage, you would need to spec into firearm critical hit rate, right? That makes sense. If you increase the rate and then you increase the damage, at the rate that you do the damage, you will get that damage. The real chunk is of your type of damage is going to come from firearm attack increase. It's going to come in from weapon damage increase. Is going to come from the elemental mods of adding extra elemental damage on that. So every time you hit an enemy, it's going to do double the hit. Matching the correct weapon type with the enemy weakness is going to give you more DPS, but the critical hit damage and the critical hit rate isn't going to be as substantial as most people want, because you're gonna, if you increase your critical hit damage and get your DPS number up to 560,000 points worth of damage, something like that, you could technically be doing that damage, but if you're not hitting a critical hit, then you're doing only half of that. So let's go into our modules and look at the tamer, and we took off the critical hit rate, we took off the critical hit damage. If we just increase our firearm attack and increase that recoil up to plus 20%, we're gonna get double the firearm attack rate. So in essence, we're going to be doing roughly 30% more damage than we were normally doing, and that's good, but it does take up 16 module slots along with rifling enforcement. Those do double stack, so we're looking at a 60 there, and we're looking at a, I want to say plus maybe 30 35 on the rifle enforcement. I have to take a look, but if we look at the, it's plus 32%. If we look at increasing the fire rate on top of increasing our firearm attack, we have a total firearm attack increase of 93%, negative 5% recoil with an 8% fire rate up. So if we were to equip some of the best modules here, again, we're going to take off this toxic enhancement. That really isn't going to add to what we're doing right now. So we're going to take that off, and we're still looking at better concentration. Vibration absorption is a R socket, so we can end up using that in our build later. But again, we're looking at the damage numbers of the DPS, because we have on the critical hit, you see the DPS numbers go from 300,000 to 310,000 or something like that. So we need to make up a marginal difference to outpace that critical hit damage. But if we're using the exact same mods while keeping on the critical hit rate damage, it's not going to show us a true number, because the critical hit rate damage is going to outpace that. Now, proper mod socketing is basically what's going to get you to incorporate the critical hit damage along with the increase of fire rate. So we're looking back and forth. Well, we have the same mods on for the most part, but we do have that better concentration still over there versus the vibration absorption. So the damage difference is minimal, but I know I can handle the tamer better with the vibration absorption. So the firearm critical hit damage is still arbitrarily boosting up our damage numbers, showing that we can do more DPS than we actually can. So I know in order to incorporate more of the critical hit things that happen in the build, we're going to need to change some things. So let's increase the fire rate up, and once we do that, you can see that in our tamer setting 3, where the mod was sitting at for the better concentration, it's going to change my setting 3 tamer, and it's going to unequip it off of there because it can't handle the mod capacity for me increasing my fire rate up to a certain point. So do I want to change a setting in order to gain more damage for somewhere else? So let's go ahead and take a look. So we're going to go back. So at setting 2, we're focused on to recoil reduction while damage, but this one is damage with crit. So which one am I leaning towards to? You already know which one I'm leaning towards to. I'm leaning towards the recoil reduction along with the increase in damage. So once I actually increase the module up to the level that I want to, a comfortable level to increase that fire rate up, because I'm trying to make up for that I want to say like 8,700 points worth of damage difference between settings 1 and settings 2. Again, now that the mod has been unequipped with the fire rate up, I get my recoil reduction and I get my DPS. So now what am I looking to do with this weapon? I'm looking to figure out how I'm going to incorporate the critical hit damage into my weapon, along with keeping all the damage enhancements that I already have on the weapon. Because I know better concentration is adding something to the weapon, but is it fluff? It could be, but when I do hit a critical hit, because I got almost a 5% chance of that, all I have to do is put on mods that can increase my critical hit chance by a little bit to get that up to a flat 5%. I'm going to need to add some crystallization catalysts in here, especially some of the M type, because those are going to reduce the rifling reinforcements and action and reaction, as I already got one on there for vibration absorption, because to me that was the important one there, as it goes flexible with my actual toxic tamer build and the DPS tamer that I have here. So I kit this weapon out for elemental damage to do one thing when I'm just running and gunning out in the world, and I keep the other one for interceptor battles, DPS, when I'm really trying to provide some damage numbers on the board for my team. If I do end up adding anything else to the tamer, I got to make sure that this goes unison with the other settings that I have here, because I'm going to want this same setting set up, but I'm going to want the added settings of the extra damage from settings 2. So be mindful when you are using these crystallization catalysts. It takes us a very long time in order to get those types of crystallization catalysts and time sinks. Be unison across the board with what you're trying to do, and have some sort of intent when modding for damage. You can have one setup for elemental, you can have one setup for pure damage. Hopefully this video helped you guys out on modding for damage. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.